AI, are we funding progress or just feeding the bubble? And my name is Dean Carlton. I am from Global Village Transformations. I specialize in project recovery and project management. And I'm joined today by Jeff Funk. Jeff.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. We are living in the biggest financial technological bubble of all time. And I'm going to talk about why I think that. I mean, bubbles are like investments. Investments are simple. You put a little money in, you get a little money out. You got a lot of money out. That's a great investment. Well, you put a little money in for an industry, for new technology, and everybody gets a lot out. That's a great technology. But when investors are putting in a lot of money and they're not getting much out, well, that's a bubble. And that's what we're in. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, price to equity ratios aren't that high. This isn't anything like these past bubbles. Well, the problem is you got to understand the bubble you're dealing with. The one we're dealing with now is AI. It revolves around one firm, OpenAI. That's a really strange thing to say because OpenAI is not a publicly traded company. It's not publicly audited. It doesn't release publicly audited figures. Now, it has a lot of firms associated with it because OpenAI sells these AI services to people, AI software to people. Then it has to pay these cloud service providers. And it set its prices so low that it can't cover those payments to the cloud service providers. Then the cloud service providers, they're making money, maybe not a lot. Now they buy money by GPUs, these video processors, from NVIDIA. NVIDIA makes a lot of money. So the investors keep putting more money in NVIDIA because it makes money. They put also a lot of money in the AI cloud providers, so their stocks go up. But remember, it's all about OpenAI. It's all about the money that it's making, that it's not making, right? So it's losing a lot of money. Now you may say, well, okay, well, how much? Well, remember, it's not publicly traded, so we don't really know. We only know what they give us. So they claim they lost $5.5 billion on $3.5 billion in revenues in 2024. This year, now they're saying they lost $8 billion in the first half of 2025 on $13 billion. Lost $8 billion on $13 billion in revenues. Or wait. It's less than that. So they're losing, basically, they are losing 6.5 billion. So the losses are bigger than the revenues, which means that their losses, that their prices are set way too low, 1/3 to 1/2 of what they should be. So this is going to continue until OpenAI raises its prices. It keeps hoping. Okay, we're hoping. We're going to have this next GPT-5 didn't do well, but GPT-6 is going to do well. It's going to do so well that everybody's going to not have to use so many tokens to get their questions answered. See, the problem is the accuracy hasn't gone up. So OpenAI has to, people have to keep, that they have to spend so much money on cloud services in order to satisfy these users. Now, so this isn't going to work out. Now, people are thinking that the accuracy is going to go up. Well, it didn't go up in GPT-5. So they still want to tell you the fastest growing technology over time, the fastest improvement. Well, fastest growing technology over time doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how fast the number of users is growing if they're losing money on every user, right? Think of a car. There's a new car out there, and the car maker says, well, we're going to sell it to you for 1/3 what it costs us. People really buy a lot of them. And there's somebody making factories for them, says, yeah, they're selling lots of cars. We're making lots of money selling these this equipment that they use to make factories. But the cars money is being lost on every car that's being made. Now, if you heard that, you'd say, this isn't very good. This isn't very good. But for some reason, people are thinking, oh, it's great that NVIDIA is making all this money from selling GPUs to cloud providers and they sell services to AI, but OpenAI isn't making any money. OpenAI is losing big money, right? What's going to happen in the long run? Well, in the long run, OpenAI is going to raise its prices. When it raises its prices, what happens?
Okay, so we may have lost Jeff temporarily. So let's look to. He should be joining back again in a moment. Let's have a look at what people are saying.
Impact on NVIDIA.
Okay, so
So
Jeff's back.
there isn't a good end to this. Now, as I also said about this improvement, right? Most people kind of think, well, AI is getting so much better, generative AI is getting so much better because, I mean, look at all the new products coming out, the services, the announcements, right? And the media just jumps on any kind of announcement and says how great it is, partly because there's all this media that's being paid for by the tech companies, right? You got to remember that most, it's not like 40 years ago when there was a few television stations, a few newspapers, a few magazines, and if you wanted to get your product information about your product, you had to advertise through them, and they didn't want to do false advertising. But nowadays, it's mostly just all these websites, and anybody can start a website, and all this money goes in on it, and they just publish things that are pro tech now. Then and of course, social media is filled with people doing this. I mean, they're being paid. They're paid influencers. These influencers don't work for nothing, right? And they'll usually just publish what they can make money on. And then the relatively independent media, well, they're kind of stuck. They kind of feel like, oh, we have to back all these. We have to say good things about AI and all these big companies because we want them to advertise them, so they want them to talk to us. So it's not really that's kind of the noise, all this, oh, AI is getting better, AI is getting better. But in reality, it's not. I mean, the frequency of hallucinations hasn't been going down. And this has been obvious for a long time, for a couple of years. This was one of the first variables that, right away when generative AI came, I realized, okay, the key variable is the amount of hallucinations. How accurate is the information that ChatGPT produces? This is a key variable. And you couldn't find it. You could hear all kinds of talk about other things. And when GPT-5 came out, even the people who love GPT-4 were saying, "Hey, this isn't much better than GPT-4." So GPT-5, it's not this big breakthrough. And if it's not, we didn't get a big breakthrough in GPT-5. What makes you think we're going to get it in GPT-6, GPT-7, or anything else that comes out? Right? You might be thinking, well, these other startups, they do well. Maybe they'll produce something. Yeah, they might, but they're facing the same challenges that OpenAI is facing. The same challenges of, how, how do we make a probabilistic machine more deterministic, right? We all know that there's a probability that these are probabilistic machines that are just destined to produce a lot of hallucinations. Now, do you want to throw something in, Dean, or you want me to go on to something new?
I think the point about the hallucinations is really important. When you probably know the percentages better than I do, but it's I've seen 40%, over 40%, and over 65% thrown around as figures. And my sort of thoughts on that are that in a business context, 40 to 60% isn't good enough. And I guess if we look at here in Australia, Commonwealth Bank, they recently laid off a bunch of human agents because they were deploying AI agents in their place, and then they've had to go back and cap in hand rehire the people that they fired, basically. So, you know, I think there's a long way to go, and it probably points to the further conversation around are LLMs really the right way to be deploying AI in business? Are there other AI approaches, AI models that would better serve business than in those use cases, LLMs?
Yeah, this is a very common argument, right? When you want to explain why OpenAI can't set prices that cover its costs, it's because people aren't willing to pay for them, right? They'll say we got 800 million users and this is a big deal, but only 3% are paying. And the others are paying, but, and of those 3%, they're paying, but they're not paying enough to cover costs. Why doesn't OpenAI raise prices? Well, because it has performance problems. And so a question comes: are those performance problems going to be solved? Well, probably not. Like I said, the GPT-5 isn't much better than GPT-4, so we can't expect future versions to be that much better. But this Dean also brought up a good point of whether he likes it or not, because some people really love ChatGPT, and when people tell me they love ChatGPT, I tend to believe them. I can envision, it helps you write email, or helps you write reports, it helps you summarize meetings, it helps you summarize reports, helps students do their homework, right? There's a lot of ways, and for them, if they think that the frequency of hallucinations isn't too much, okay, fine, you like it, uh, and you know, making videos, right? I can see that videos will be a big application because there's a lot of videos where you don't care that much about hallucinations, right? YouTube videos and things, very cheap videos you're making that are are for YouTube videos that maybe don't get that many views, so you don't care. So it improves the economics of YouTube by being able to make advertising videos from generative AI. Okay, and you say these things are great. I believe you, right? And then there are people who do coding, and they say it really helps them a lot. Okay, I believe you. Now there's studies that suggest that it's got to be simple code. You got to really be an expert to use it well. Okay, fine, I believe you. But the main point I want to make is that an easy way to judge how good ChatGPT is, or generative AI in general, is not to use it, it's to look at the revenues. Because you see, revenues are like a vote. People are voting out there, they're voting with their money. Now, of course, people are voting with their time too, and so they might use something for free. But money is really a better indicator, because a lot of people have a lot more time than money. Money is, again, it's a vote. And so you look and you see, oh, there aren't many revenues. And you know what? Those revenues can't cover the cost. So if the prices were raised, the revenues would go down. People vote with their money. So it's very important, right? I know there's a lot of ways that people try to evaluate a new technology. And one of them is they say that they use it and they say, oh, this is great. Oh, it's going to take over the world. It's going to do great. Well, it's just your vote, right? And so I'm not saying any of you are wrong or lying or anything like that. If you love it, hey, I believe you. But the revenues tell a different story. Uh, and then other people, they say, well, all of this doesn't matter. It matters the potential of a new technology, right? I get this a lot of times, and I understand. For research, right, you have to make these decisions. What should we spend research dollars on? Well, you want to spend research dollars on something that the research is going to have an impact, that you're going to use this money, you're going to do this research, and it's going to get better and better, and then it's going to affect the world. And in history, we see lots of technologies that have huge potential. I mean, Charles Babbage was developing computers, mechanical computers, back in 1870. In retrospect, they had a huge potential. It just took 100 years to get there, right? So don't just talk about potential. You have to talk about how many improvements are going on. How many improvements are going on that will enable this potential to be realized? So that's why I mentioned that GPT-5 isn't that much better than GPT-4. There may be a great potential for AI, right? You got to remember there's this bias towards AI. It's been going on for 60 years. Every time these elitists, these real big thinkers, Yuval Harari and others, oh my gosh, AI, it's going to be as smart as humans. It has a great potential. That's pretty weak. I mean, I'll tell you, you look at history, and there's a lot of technologies that have had a great potential and done well, and it had nothing to do with intelligence. I mean, water wheels are a great technology. Uh, then we replaced some of the steam engines. There's been a lot of great technologies, and just to say that it can be as smart as humans and thus put us all at work and has great potential, kind of ignores really the whole the way that technology is diffused. What I always say is long-term forecasts should be consistent with short-term trends. What's the short-term trends in generative AI? Short-term trend is not a big improvement over GPT-4. Now, this doesn't mean that something's going to happen, right? Something's going to happen in AI in the long run. It's just a question of how long it takes. And remember, I'm I'm talking about this all within the context of a bubble, all within the context of I don't know how much money is going to be spent on AI infrastructure this year. $1 trillion. That's what we're talking about. Improvements within that context. Right? That's just going away 50 years. They want this to happen very, very fast. Now, Dean's mentioning that there's a lot of people who want to. He's showing me these comments, good comments that there's a lot of people that want to say that OpenAI, that AI is great, right? If you've invested your career in this, you're going to be optimistic about it, right? You wouldn't be spending your time on it. If you've invested money in it, you're going to be optimistic about it. You have to be, right? The companies that have put a lot of money in this have to be optimistic. That's the only choice. They made their choice 5 years ago or further back when they made it, and so they can't change their mind now. And I know there's some other variables like interest rates and things that people are thinking about when the bubble's going to break. I can't tell you when the bubble's going to break because the bubble's going to break when investors start believing that the future isn't as good as they thought it was going to be. And Nobel laureate Robert Schuller calls this a narrative. I mean, he argues that every bubble is justified by a narrative. Somebody comes up with a story that justifies these big investments, right? And it sounds funny. These finance people, they know all kinds of math and everything else. Yet when it comes down to the decision about about AI and a new technology, it's all about a narrative. It's all about a story, right? It's a story, and Robert Schuller argues that the bubble breaks when the narrative changes. And when the narrative changes, there's a big change because he talks about how when there's a positive narrative and the bubble keeps getting bigger, every time the share prices go up, it reinforces their narrative, reinforces their belief. Oh, you see, share prices are going up. Everybody thinks that this new technology is so great. But once it starts to go down, once that narrative breaks, then it works the opposite way because everybody's saying that it's because now the narrative is no, it's not quite so good. So the share price will go down. And then more people say, yeah, the narrative, it's not so good. The narrative goes further. And these price reductions justify this entire process of how a bubble declining. So it happens very quickly, right? So the Nasdaq went down, I don't know, 70% in a couple of years, and 40% a year. Once it starts to go down, it goes down very quickly. Something you want to throw in here, Dean? You want me to talk about?
So going back to what you were talking earlier about the AI generated content, videos and things, it reminded me of where my head's been going over this last month or two, which is the volume of AI slop is increasing, disproportionately, and it's basically taking over existing content. And what I'm finding is, as a user of things like social media, particularly social media, but other areas as well, is that I'm backing out of content. I'm going to find something, and I'm finding, right, that's an AI generation thing, and I back out of it immediately. And what I've actually done is I've actually started changing my usage patterns, possibly for the better, and using social media less because it's less valuable. Uh, and I'm seeing this. It's like a film mediocrity. You keep consuming the garbage that you put out there, and everything just goes down to an even lower level of competence, of value, of usability, of usefulness. So, what's your take on that?
Well, let's go back to the narrative. So the narrative is that AI is going to be so good that it's going to improve our productivity, generate all these revenues, generate all these profits, right? And it's going to generate profits because it's also going to generate benefits for all of us. It's going to make us all far more productive. Uh, and whether the layoffs exceed all these benefits, well, that's a different question. The question, the issue of this productivity, right? And of course, productivity hasn't emerged. Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee argued what back in 2012 with their first book. I don't know if it was Race Against the Machine or it was another one. They had a whole bunch of books talking about AI was going to change the world 13 years ago, right? And for a number of years, people kept looking for productivity improvements. Where are the productivity improvements? I was the same way. I mean, I remember thinking, wow, IBM Watson, this is going to change everything, right? And no productivity improvements for years and years and years, right? And then finally, the IBM Watson story ended in about 2014 with the Wall Street Journal wrote that it wasn't working as well at University of Texas, some medical center, as it was supposed to do. So this has been this narrative about productivity improvements for a long time. Um, and now people are, Ben Jolson, McAfee, all these economists who are very positive about AI will say, well, it takes a long time to get productivity improvements. It does. It does. I mean, I agree with you. So I found it very strange that they would have talked about the productivity improvements from the very beginning because, what happens before you get productivity improvements from the technology? I mean, you might get it at the micro level, right? There has to be some there. And Dean, you're referring to the fact that they're not there. Okay, but maybe they'll happen. But before we get back to that, I want to talk about something else, which is that at the macro level, it takes a long time to identify productivity improvements. So if you're looking at the productivity statistics, we're not going to see AI in there for a very long time. But we should see some other things before then. What are those? Profits from companies, revenues from companies. You look at every technology, there's been no exceptions. Take computers, for example, 1950s mainframes. IBM had revenues and profits right away. So did the other computer manufacturers, mini computer manufacturers, personal computer manufacturers. They had revenues and profits. It wasn't until the 1990s that the productivity improvements from computers showed up in the statistics. It took 40 years. But it had revenues and profits before then. You see, we don't see the revenues and profits from for OpenAI and the other uh, AI software providers. Now, I know mostly I'm talking about OpenAI, but all the software providers are the same. They're all losing money. I'll tell you, if they were making money, they'd go public. Right? They'd go public. Whenever somebody doesn't release any information on something, it's because the information isn't good. I tell you, all these companies want to brag. And so if they have a chance to brag, they're going to brag. That's why they haven't gone public. So productivity, yeah. Is it going to happen? Will it show up in the statistics in the long run? Well, first it has to show up in revenues and profits at the macro level. And as Dean has pointed out, it has to show up at the individual level. People have been looking for that, right? So Dean mentioned work slop. So there was a recent Harvard Business Review article. There's been some others that have found that of 1,150 U.S. based full-time employees, 40% report having received work slop in the last month. That's a lot of percent. And of those employees who've encountered work slop, they say that an average of 15% of the content received work qualifies. Now, that is a lot. Now, it's not everybody. You always have to remember that they're in statistics, right? You know statistics, and you know that there's typical people, there's untypical people. There's always somebody that gets a whole lot of work slop, and there's people who don't, right? So maybe it's done better in some organizations, right? And so in some organizations, are succeeding with AI. I think right now it's just not very many. I mean, an MIT study found that 95% were getting a return on investment. So 5% were getting something. Now, and people want to figure out, well, why is 5%? Did they do something right? Well, it could be they do something right, but it could be just statistics, right? There's statistics. I mean, I go shoot basket when I was a basketball player when I was a kid. My son plays it now, and you know, some days I'd make 80% free throws in front of my house shooting baskets. Some days I wouldn't, right? And someday in those 80%, maybe I was shooting better with shooting more correctly with the 80% that went in than the 20% that I missed, or maybe it was just kind of due to statistics and variance and a whole bunch of other things. So we don't really know if 5% are really have done something that you can document that made them successful. Could just be some kind of variance. So and
Let's
they're not the only ones. There's a more recent study from Atlassian, a software company, that found 12,000. They had 12,000 survey respondents, and it found even higher. Only 4% were successful.
just let,
You want
just,
to listen, Dean?
let's for a moment, just overlook hallucinations, and let's ignore the slop that's generated as a result of some of those, and let's assume that we get the productivity gains from the use of AI. What that is then doing is leading to this cognitive decline in the people that are using AI. You got any
Well, I
comments
think,
on that?
well, I
So,
think that those are two independent things. Whether we get a productivity improvement or whether we get a cognitive decline are two separate things.
100%.
It's quite likely that any productivity acceleration will take a lot longer to achieve than we thought. Uh, and even then, there are the people who are using too much AI may get a cognitive decline. It will depend. It will depend. I mean, some people, they claim that it helps them in productivity, it helps them cognitively, and I believe them. Again, when people make these claims, I tend to believe them because they're talking about some narrow set of tasks. They're talking about dealing with those tasks in a certain way, and they generally can't articulate that, but that's very common. People who are very successful or creative oftentimes cannot explain how they came up with these ideas, and why they come up with more ideas with anyone. I've always been suspicious of CEOs talking about why they succeeded or why their company succeeded because they're too close to it. They did, obviously something happened that caused them to succeed, and some of that may have been what they did and then did differently, but they usually can't articulate it because it's hard. It's very hard to figure these things out. So there may be there's likely to be, and this is one of the reasons why there'd be a more general cognitive decline, because people can't really articulate how you should use ChatGPT. It's like trying to tell people how you were able to read books and understand more than everyone, when you're 12 years old. I remember at 12 years old there was this big boom in how you read fast. I forget what the term was, but it was so you didn't have to read everything. Right? You just read some of it and you understood it. It never worked, right? There's obviously some people are able to read books and get more out of them than other people. Some people are able to use AI better than other people. Some people are going to suffer from cognitive decline from using AI. And why that is, it's going to be, psychologists are going to spend a lot of time in this, and uh, it's a hard problem to address. But basically, you cannot be dependent on this, and it's it's a big challenge for parents. I mean, I know many parents who are just scared. They're scared of AI because they're scared of this problem, cognitive decline. They're scared of their child getting an AI girlfriend or boyfriend and becoming emotionally dependent on them, right? We see these, you know, it's a very small number of cases, rare cases of people committing suicide and things. So this is going to scare parents, but obviously these are rare cases, and I doubt whether they really become very common. But you know, lesser impacts. Just the cognitive decline is enough to scare all of us, right? As a parent, I mean, I know that my son, he's in Singapore. We're in Singapore, and he's 12, and he says that some of his friends write all their assignments with
Mm.
ChatGPT. Now, this isn't good. He's not. They're not going to learn to write doing that. So this is going to require a lot of work by society. So I think a lot of people have questioned, mostly Gary Marcus, about whether AI is going to provide more benefits than harm because of these kinds of things. I mean, education is going to get very hard, right, as a teacher, in trying to figure out, and trying to how to use AI effectively. I mean, there was one teacher that told his students you can't use AI at all, and then he used AI to detect whether they were using AI. And one girl said, "No, I never used it." Right? Well, of course this is going to happen. We know that ChatGPT hallucinates, so why wouldn't the ChatGPT detector hallucinate? Right? So we got a lot of people that don't know how to think about this very well when really they have to. Right? This is what scares a lot of people, is that ChatGPT is requiring us to be a lot smarter than we are, and we don't have enough of those people.
And here's another thing, Jeff. You ask a question of almost every AI that I've tried, and it's so goddamn confident. It has to give you an answer. It won't just stop and say, "Nah, I can't help you there."
Yeah.
And I did a test the other day, and I started out just asking it to reword a paragraph, and it was a paragraph from somebody else. It wasn't even my own writing, and it rewrote that in that AI style, and I gave it a few pointers about how it should write it. But then it then gave me a response which said, "Would you like me to?" Which is the little crack cocaine trial that it's sort of giving you. And I said, "Yeah, okay, go ahead and do that." And then it finishes that, and it carries on. It wants to lead you down a path. So I spent about probably an hour going through this, giving it its head of steam, and eventually it's written me a book. It's written me this go to market for a global program which is going to be launched at Davos and the World Economic Forum, and it's got these sort of grandiose ideas about things that you can do, and there were some interesting ideas in there, but it never wants to stop. It always wants to give you great news and be so confident in I know best. And I think that's what's leading lots of people astray.
Yeah, it's apparently addictive, and it's going to you know tell you how great you are and stuff, and all this type of stuff to be addictive, and that's the purpose of Sam Altman OpenAI designed it that way, to be addictive, so you want to keep using it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the ironic thing is that's partly how they're getting big losses, because it's so addictive. People want to keep using it, and they lose money on every user. It's like the old joke about we're going to make it up in volume. We're losing money on every user, but we'll make it up in volume. And so he's created something that's very addictive. He's hoping, right? All these companies are just hoping that something's going to come, some great thing is going to happen that is suddenly going to make all these problems go away. OpenAI works great, and we have great productivity, and they make lots of money. Uh, I want to say something here, is that even if ChatGPT becomes better, even if I'm still suspicious of any big impact on productivity. And I think the bubble is way overvalued. And what is that? When I first heard about generative AI back in 2022, I thought, wait a minute, there's very few industries whose output is relevant, is related to text or videos, right? I mentioned videos for ads. Okay, so advertising, uh, but text, oh, publishing and things. This is a very small part of the economy. So even if we solve all these problems, yeah, it will have an impact on productivity, but probably not a big one. I mean, I know that you see, it's mostly support workers, consulting companies, finance companies, support companies in companies. It's not like the generative AI makes factories more productive, right? We still do a lot of manufacturing. It's not like it make farms more productive, or mines more productive, or hospitals more productive, right? It doesn't do that. It makes support workers more productive. What is the role of support workers in society? Whether if you're doing accounting or administrative or a consultant, well, your value of a consultant is measured by how well the clients do, economically speaking. The value of finance is whether it helps the whole economy work better. Right? People don't say these things anymore, but you go back 10, 20, 30 years, all economists said this. All economists said this. They said finance, the whole purpose of finance is to support the rest of the economy. If when finance is working well, all these other industries work well, everybody gets rich. That's not right. That's not the way they're using AI now. Nobody's talking about AI that way. Oh my gosh, AI is going to make finance work better, so the whole economy works better. AI works better for accountants and for consultants so that all their clients do better. No, it's whether they can produce reports faster, right? And so we had this story from in Australia where they produced a report just with AI and charged $440,000 for it, when the client could have done it themselves, right? This is the big threat to consulting companies. They have to provide some value that will cause other people to hire them. And so there's a lot of challenges here for people to use AI effectively. You have to think about more carefully why they're using the AI. And I don't see people doing that. About a year ago, my wife came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to read this, read this that I wrote." And I read it, and it was a letter of recommendation from somebody. So there's no grammatical mistakes here. This is not you. Now, I know I use ChatGPT. And I said, well, I also noticed there's no anecdotal comments about this person in question. That is why we have letters of recommendation. We don't have letters of recommendation to say, oh, this person is so good and da. No, it's because they throw in something about a project that person did with you or did for you that was really, really good. That's why we have letters of recommendation. If we have them written by ChatGPT, the letters of recommendation are no longer useful. If we have reports that are written by AI that don't really help some organization improve, we don't need the report, right? And so AI people have to think about this, or everybody has to think about this. This is a global problem that most people don't have the ability to think beyond their own job. They just say, ChatGPT, help me do my job. It's going to change the world. No, you got to think about it more broadly than that. You need a different argument than that. Technologies have changed our lives in the past, and AI might do that. But you can't just think about your job. You got to think about how it's improving processes so that your external customers benefit. If AI doesn't do that, then why are we using it? And that's why these studies find this problem, right? MIT, the Atlassian one Atlassian software company I mentioned, they're not finding improvements because the people who are using AI are struggling with this. I mean, some of them are doing their best and struggling. Some of them are just saying, "I don't care. It makes me more productive." And so even the MIT report admits that well, the biggest user of AI was there was individual people who were kind of working off the books.
Yeah.
you know,
Quantify that in the boardroom.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so most of what I've been talking about is generative AI, right? Because I really have a problem with generative AI. Predictive AI, or whatever you want to call non-generative AI, has been around for a lot longer. That's what uh, Bryn Jolson and McAfee were talking about in their first books. That's what was estimated in 2017 by this big consultant firm, McKinsey, Accenture, that would bring $16 trillion in economic gains by 2030. Right, we're nowhere near there, near that figure. Uh, predictive AI. So predictive AI, I don't have as big a problem with that. I think that it's working better than generative AI because it's not causing these problems. There's some benefit. There's successful use cases, but still, by 2022, when generative AI came out, there was no bubble for predictive AI. There was hardly even any positive comments about it anymore. We kind of given up. We kind of realized that it isn't that big a deal. It wasn't that people were criticizing it. People were just saying it had been overhyped and provided some gains, just as not much as we thought. And I know that some people, like I was on a podcast with a bunch of people, couple other AI people a week or two ago, and they were telling me how great AI was, and because I was saying, well, tell me, where are the cases? And they said, radiology, they're all being unemployed. And I knew that wasn't true because I wrote an article on this and I read so many. And I just happened to have posted one like a week before on analyzing radiologists and talking about why the number of radiologists hasn't declined. It's actually gone up, right? Jeffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, recently, uh, he got it for his work in AI, but I think it was in physics. He said in 2016 that don't even bother getting studying to become a radiologist because they're all going to be unemployed in 5 years. Now, of course, not unemployed. In fact, 10 years later, right, the number of radiologists has increased. And this study was interesting because that analyzed why it hadn't decreased. They basically said these AI models are trained to detect a single finding or condition in one type of image, and that radiologists use multiple images and look for multiple things in an image. So if you're going to use AI, you got to take a lot of images, you got to run a lot of tests. AI, run the AI model a lot. So yeah, if you combine AI with a human, if a radiologist uses AI, they can detect things a little better than they did before. But it takes a lot more time. It's not like it's going to be this thing that gets rid of all these workers. So even predictive AI has these problems, right? But people don't pay attention. They just remember that they heard that predictive AI is changing radiology. Well, it is. It's just that it's not having anywhere near the size of impact that people are claiming.
On the subject of radiology, years ago for Baxter Healthcare, I led a team where we were developing software to control the manufacture of patient-specific chemotherapy treatments. And in that kind of regulated industry, pharmaceuticals, you use the V model, which is all about validating requirements and validating the test, and you validate the whole life cycle of the product from initial concept to retirement of that product. And it's very rigorous, very documented, and it's governed by things like CFR 21, GAMP 5 regulations, or GAMP's probably GAMP 6 now. So generally accepted medical practices, things like that. And I cannot conceive of a day when, as a company like Baxter Healthcare, I would want somebody to be vibe coding a system to manufacture patient-specific chemotherapy treatments where an underdose and an overdose typically results in death of the patient. What are your sort of thoughts on things like vibe coding and using AI for software development in particularly in mission critical scenarios, not just
Well,
for learning exercises?
there was a study by METR looking at how fast software coders could complete tasks, either with AI assisted or non AI assisted, and they found that the people who weren't being assisted by AI took longer to develop the software than those who are using the AI. Now, of course, this all depends on how complicated the software is. It also depends on how effective the person is at using AI. And again, right, I don't think people can articulate these things of why they would do better with AI than other people would. And of course, there are people who claim, well, I use AI and it works so great. Well, it depends on the level of complexity. So I think AI is going to impact on coding. It's just going to take a long time to create processes to do that. And in addition, you got to remember that most of the time of software coders is not spent coding. It's organizing the whole, what the customers need and what the architecture of the software is to be, and so on. And so I think that coding is like 25%. So even if it works perfectly, now you're at 75%. So you save 25% in time. And it doesn't work perfectly. You have to fix mistakes. So maybe it only saves you 10%. So uh, it'll be a long, slow process. It's going to be years, if not decades. And uh, the vibe coders, some people do this. There was this guy, Travis. What's the founder of Uber's name? Travis somebody. Kalanick. He talked about vibe physics, and he was using ChatGPT to investigate physics, and he kept saying, "I'm finding new physics, theories of physics, and blah blah blah." The guy doesn't have a physics degree. He's never worked in physics, right? You see, a lot of people who make these exaggerated claims aren't the experts. Let's talk about one expert coder. There was just an article 2 days ago in Gizmodo about him, where he admits that this expert coder was one of the founders of OpenAI. He since left, started his own company. He just developed this new software, and he said he did it all by hand because he couldn't trust ChatGPT. So,
I've
I
professionally programmed in probably 10 languages over the years,
yeah,
and
I
I
don't know.
cannot, again, I cannot conceive if I want, maybe there's a new type of sort that I need to do, and I want a good example of it to base the structure on. Yeah, but I used to program international monetary transmissions, cash points, ATMs, um, financial systems, complete banking systems. These aren't the sorts of things that you want to, feel the vibe while, while you're coding multi-billion-dollar financial systems. My head doesn't work. It doesn't
Yeah,
get around that. And people can say, "Well, you're a luddite," but I'm kind of not really. I kind of been round the block several thousand times, and I know why projects fail. I know why technology blows up in your face, and it's a real challenge, and it scares me. Do you want to vibe code the software that runs an Airbus 320? Probably
yeah,
not.
yeah. Obviously, mission critical software is not what you want to use vibe coding for.
Yeah,
And like I said, it depends on the complexity and depends on your tolerance for errors. But there are applications. I mean, you're creating some new app, so maybe you use ChatGPT for it, and or you're making a website. and then you check it afterwards. I mean, that's the thing. You have to. So that's why I say I believe it when people tell me that it helps them a lot,
Mm.
because they're using it for the right application, for an application that isn't mission critical, that can tolerate errors, that isn't too complex. I believe that. I believe all that. So I believe them. But why am I pessimistic about it? Again, to come back to this, because the revenues are small. You see, that is the vote that I look at. That is a vote. People are voting with their money. So yeah, there people tell me I really love it. I really use it a lot. Well, but the revenues suggest that there aren't very many people like you. And remember that anybody who's a ChatGPT user is not paying the full price for it. And what's going to happen when they go full price? Demand's going to go down. So uh, I believe people when they say they're using it and they benefited from it. But it's just that those people represent a small part of all the users, and a lot of times they're using it for something and they think, "Oh, it's had a big impact." But then, if you really look at what they're doing, well, maybe it's like 5%, 10%.
There you go. So I think in an earlier conversation with you, you talked about the potential that some of the people that are drawn to AI are possibly those that understand its limitations less.
It's hard to say because I think there's a lot of these people who they're looking for a shortcut, and we all look for shortcuts, and we all look for shortcuts to do things we want to be more productive. So people are looking for a shortcut, and they find AI, and so then they become a coder. But there are also really top experts who know how to use AI. Well. I mean, but see, it's the same thing. It was the same thing with like Google search. I mean, some people are better at that, right? I mean, most of us realized when the internet started that this was a great way to find information. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that, right? But then we were also the people who read books and, looked for uh, how to find information. I mean, I'm one of those people that's read thousands of books in his life. But I tell you, I don't read every word. Why do I read every word? I mean, you read books on a lot of books on one subject, and pretty soon they're telling the same stories. So you read a book, and I look for what's different than what I've seen before, or what's contradictory, and you learn to do that. And that's what you do on Google search. You're interested in some issue, and you want to know more about it, and so you kind of know where the controversy is, so you focus on that and you learn that, and that's great. And so I'm sure people can do this with ChatGPT. I mean, I use it all the time because it shows up in my when I'm on Bing or on
Mm.
Google. It shows up, and sometimes it gives me what I want to know, because sometimes I want to know more about something. A lot of the times it's just more facts. It's not and sometimes it's controversy. I'm looking for some specific issue that one side thinks that, one side thinks that. I want to know more about it. But all of that comes back to how good the person is at trying to find new information. Uh, and there are people, as you mentioned, they're not an expert, and they're just looking for the conclusion.
Yeah.
You know? And people who write these reports, right? They just want to get a good summary. And if you want a good summary of things, yeah, ChatGPT will give you good stuff. It'll give you a summary, bring out all the viewpoints. But if you want to go beyond that and understand the controversy, you have to push ChatGPT, just like you had to push Google search, or just you had to push and look for new books on the subject.
Yeah. Interesting question there from Chris Mousley. Hi, Chris. Long time no speak. Um, do you think we have tunnel vision with hyper focus on open AI versus what may be emerging out of China and India on a much smaller sort of technical footprint?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a long time. I mean, I thought that initially the DeepSeek didn't go very far, and so it was just all a bunch of baloney. But I know
Mhm.
people who believe otherwise, and I wrote a paper, an article with one of them, Greg Zoller, George Zoller, who's in Singapore, who's from Germany and really knows the topic, and basically saying that the whole future is small language models.
Mhm.
His point is that if you use a large language model in a company, uh, or let me rephrase it, you can create a small language model on your data by using a large language model. You can create a small language model that handles some topic or topic, something less than the whole language model. And so then it's smaller, it works better, and it's cheaper. So something like this could happen. Something like this, and I've thought this for a long time. In that, why companies, you see, a lot of people tell me, "Well, I like ChatGPT because it helps me answer these questions. I can use an assistant. I can ask them about this and ask them about that." Uh, and yeah, I agree with that. But I say that's not what people do at work. Most people have very specific tasks they're trying to complete. They don't
Mhm.
care about all this stuff. 99.9% of what you see out there in the world isn't relevant for the job. And it's not that they're not curious, they're busy, they got to do something very small. A small language model can handle that. These chat bots and things, for customer service. I've been thinking that he argues that George Zoller argues that uh, this is what companies should be doing and that it will happen soon. And okay, I don't know if I agree 100%, but I think it's a really valid argument, and it's a really plausible scenario that you're going to see this after the bubble pops.
Mm.
It's going to turn out that what was the most successful were these small language models.
Yeah, and in terms of the sort of, I talked earlier about the Combank, and I think the team that they fired was, I think it's only about 15 people, but then they hired them back. But the actual AI companies themselves, they've had a lot of hiring and freezing and rehiring, sorry, firing. Uh, what are your thoughts on that? You're smiling.
One of the things I learned very young, I don't know if it's because of teachers or what, but you always have to understand the incentives of the person giving their opinion, saying something, right? And,
Hmm.
and CEOs have a big incentive to hype their company, get the share price up, because that impacts on what salary they get. And these companies all want to say that all these people are going to employ it because then some investors will cheer them and say, "Oh yes, this guy knows what's going on." Um, I don't believe them. I don't believe what CEOs say. When CEOs tell me, there are some things I believe. Some things that they have this guidance where they have to provide very accurate information on the next quarter. They can get sued if they lie on that. But I don't think they can get sued to lie on unemployment. I mean, there's been some lawsuits, and basically, if you tell very specific tiny lies, you can be held liable. But if you just make very broad, "Oh, AI is magic, it's going to change everything," if you make those kind of statements, it doesn't matter. So they know they're trained how to talk by the lawyers, and so they'll say the things that will up their share price. And you know, if you're going to make the claim that AI is leading to large amounts of unemployment, you have to demonstrate that AI is working on a micro level. You can't just talk about the macro level. I mean, unemployment, either at the macro level for the whole economy or for individual professions or for individual companies, depends on a lot of things. A lot of things. To suddenly say that it's all determined by AI is absolutely ridiculous. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, for example, people were saying this about software industries. And so I went, and I mean, there was recently this paper, Bryn Olson wrote this paper showing that young workers, the number of young workers had declined faster than the number of older workers. And so I looked into this and I looked into the database that I forget the name of the database that they use. There was an article about a year or two ago in the same database, or a few years ago, showing the number of software works in the industry, and it had been declining for years. It had been going up in the 2010s, but then in the last 5 years it went down. And it talked about how H-1 visas and other such things, and it was like, oh my gosh, right? The number of software engineers employed in the US depends on a whole bunch of factors, including all these H-1 visas. And you're going to say that some change in the number is a function of AI? Come on, it's a function of a lot of things. So be very careful when you look at macro figures. Look at the micro figures. Look at the stories of, Gizmodo. Look on Gizmodo. Look at this article by this guy, this OpenAI co-founder, who says that he didn't use vibe coding to do this software he just made because it doesn't work well enough. That's much more relevant than the macroeconomic, the unemployment figures. And by the way, the unemployment figures aren't that. Unemployment is not going up that much. Also, there's something called layoffs.fyi. It summarizes all the layoffs. Do you know when the layoffs peaked in the tech sector? Back in about two or 3 years ago. Far more than now. We're not seeing that. So, and I'm not saying any one of these sources is the one thing you should look at. I'm saying there's a lot of sources. When you're trying to understand some trend, what's going on, look at a lot of sources. There should be agreement. If you're making a big argument about some big change that's coming out of the economy, there should be agreement among various data sources.
Yeah. So there's always a role for us in the future as slop fixers, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a good field to be in. You're right, because companies have made they've tried to gone in on whole with AI, and they produced a lot of bad code and a lot of bad content, and somebody has to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do. I mean, people need those skills, and it could be that in the long run, it turns out that creating stuff with AI is faster overall than doing without AI, and so you just have to know how to create it and work with the AI, and then you also have to know how to fix the content and code that somebody didn't do so well with using AI. Right there.
Yeah. So in my own sort of niche, my own line, project program management, health check, project recoveries, that sort of thing. I've been talking to various different people about, has AI impacted your day-to-day use, and where people are using it, it's sort of things like Copilot related, and it's really for some reports, for meeting minutes, but even if they get 40% of the documentation that they need, they're spending 60-80% of the time then reworking it to make it fit for purpose. So it's like the subtext that I'm getting is that people are being told that they've got to use it to improve their productivity, but it's just creating more work for them.
Yeah.
So again, one of my last engagements was doing a technology and business project review for a police force, $1.3 billion worth of projects, not just technical. And whilst we could have potentially used some AI for checking documents and things, it really involved talking to hundreds of people. It really involved applying experience and the grey matter and nearly 40 years of knowing why projects go wrong, which stones to lift up and look underneath, to actually come up with recommendations for fixing the challenges. And I think certainly in my line of work, there's plenty of opportunity for a fair old while to come.
Yeah, there was some data released recently by OpenAI, and it was on all over LinkedIn for a couple of weeks, and it's mostly personal use. The data was on what people use AI chat GPT for, and it was mostly for personal use,
Mm.
as a therapist to write stuff and things like that. Very little was for business, but for business, as you said, it's writing mail and reports and
Yeah.
summarizing them for them. Uh, uh,
And bringing it back to the bubble, the AI bubble. Uh, we both believe that this is a bubble that's being fed, and we both. I think I'm right in saying that we both believe that this is a bubble which is going to burst. I've got an opinion on when that might happen. Do you?
well, it's hard to say because the person you want to ask is the people you want to ask are the people who invested in the AI companies, particularly ones who invested a long time ago, uh, because they're the ones that can determine it. I mean, as I said earlier, it's about a narrative. When the narrative changes, and when the narrative changes, is when those early investors say, "Hmm, maybe I should get out now." I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of early investors who have already gotten out. I mean, I keep hearing that all the, Sam Altman and all the people like that got out, have mostly gotten out a while back. But you got to look at those people and see when they're getting out and talk to those people and say, and ask them, because that will tell you when it happens. But of course, once they start talking, and you hear it, you hear it talking, you hear people. Sam Altman admits there's a bubble. Jerome Powell admits there's a bubble. All these people admit there's a bubble. So when is there enough to cause the share price to go down? And I'm not good enough finance to understand, well, how many people does it take? What percentage of investors have to sell before it really goes down, right? There's some new investors. Some investors are always, old investors are always leaving, but new investors are going in. How many of those, how rapidly are those new investors going in? I don't know, right? So probably traditional finance. I don't have different background in finance. I have a background in physics and engineering. My PhD is in engineering, but involves some economics. And I've learned a little about finance, more about economics over the years. But you know, I cannot be an investment advisor, right? So that tells you how rich I am.
Uh,
So
I'm going to take my punt. I think it could be any time from now to March 2026 latest.
well, you see, that's a long time in advance. 6 months. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and in
the
fact,
circular
yeah.
financing, though, is telling, the circular financing, because this
Yeah,
suggests that these guys are desperate. If they want to get, they got to get, and the size of the announcements, right? $100 billion, these kind of announcements. And, uh, I thought that OpenAI would have trouble raising money this last round. And then they got money from the Middle East and from Singapore. Singapore's wealth fund put in money. They didn't have any problem. Now they've got this circular financing because, right, they're losing so much money. They've even admitted they're going to have $115 billion in cumulative losses by 2029, which is when they predict they're going to be profitable. Remember, that's when they predict, right? That doesn't mean it's going to happen. $115 billion is a lot of money. Amazon had $3 billion in cumulative losses when it became profitable in 2004. Uber had almost $40 billion in cumulative losses when it became profitable 2 years ago. Now OpenAI is saying $115 billion, right? And people want to say, well, Amazon did it. Come on, this is not in the same ballpark. That's like saying that I could have made the pros in basketball because I played in high school. Come on. It's a different league, $115 billion.
yeah. Okay, so have you got any concluding remarks?
Well, AI is has a lot of uses, but you got to be careful and use it properly. Remember, that's first. Second, if you're investing in AI right now, if you're this late, you're going to lose money, right? So If you invested 3 years ago, well, good for you. You should probably sell. If you invested 2 years ago, well, that's still good for you, but you should probably sell.
Excellent.
But don't go in now.
All right. So I'm gonna see if I can do a draw for the signed copy of the book. Hopefully that can happen live. And it better not be me. Now, I can't read that. Can you read that? I need to look at a larger preview. Let me have a look. No, I can't see that. I will contact that person immediately after this. So I expected to have it working in another monitor, but it isn't at the moment. Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this live today. Bit of a challenge at the beginning. We didn't get any indication that we'd actually started, so apologies for that. I'd like to thank Jeff for joining us today and talking. Really interesting as ever to talk to you, Jeff. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon. And I'll carry on the conversation in the comments with all the people that have been kind enough to share their thoughts during this live stream. So thanks very much, everyone.
So
And
you can follow me on LinkedIn. My email is just my name, jeffreelyfunk@gmail.com. Here's my book, Hype, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles. I'm also on X, Jeffrey Lee Funk, but I don't have any followers. So
fantastic.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening.
You can have some of mine. And my book, Slaying the Digital Beast, I will send that out to one lucky person, wherever you are in the world. And look forward to seeing some of you again at one of our future events. Take care, everybody. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Bye.